In this installment, I've finally cleared out my DVR, and what I found on that thing. I found some great shows on my VHS transfers, including my Friday night feature, and recorded some history in my current catalog. Here we go!
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on video, Fuzzy.
A couple of weeks ago, I managed to get my DVR completely cleared out. Thus began phase 2 of this process, cataloging. In the past couple of weeks, I managed to catalog 9 transfer discs at 2 hours each, and 4 current discs at 6 hours each, for a total of 42 hours. Naturally, I didn't watch 42 hours of material. I caught enough of each show to figure out what it was, dutifully copied the title into my listing, and clicked ahead to the next one. Before I get into what I found, however, here's some thoughts I have about what I've been watching. By the time I'd cataloged my 4th current disc, I'd already encountered my first recording of Supernatural, which, perfectly enough, was the Monster Movie episode. Between TNT's airing of that 4th season episode sometime in January and my finally watching Alpha and Omega, the end of the season 11 a couple of weeks ago, I have watched 177 episodes of The Misadventures of Sam and Dean Winchester, and never once in all that time did it occur to anyone to turn either of them into women. I mean, they came close when an all-girls school performed a supernatural-themed musical for the 200th episode, but really, Sam was once actually the victim of a body-switching spell, and he was still a dude. That's not my big takeaway on this, by the way. In the 11 seasons I've watched, I still haven't seen season 12, so no spoilers, but it stands out, especially since the show has featured some incredibly powerful female characters. Abaddon needed more screen time. I enjoyed revisiting the run-up to Sam's descent into Hell following Dean's time in Hell, and the wars waged in heaven and hell between demons and angels, and hey, how central a character Mark Shepard, Badger from Firefly, became in the series. I enjoyed the theology, how the show explored what could be extrapolated from scripture and apocrypha, how the writers clearly took some pains to acquaint themselves with the Bible while maintaining the brothers' jaded, secular reactions to it. Angels are jerks, being one of them. Despite how often they've cast spells and used magic and all that goes with it, they've always approached it as a means to an end. To be fair, as Sam pursued the trials, they were in fact changing him, and Crawley for that matter, but generally it's like, I chanted these words and dipped this thing in that stuff so as to accomplish this goal or overcome that obstacle, and if there are otherworldly effects, I'll treat them like a hangover. Very practical. Joss Whedon usually exacted heady payment for the use of magic in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, which I prefer because supernatural powers should come with a price tag, and indeed the brothers do occasionally nearly die from their dabbling. But for the most part, they've got it down to a science, and it serves a storyline they're pursuing, generally satisfying. I can't think of a storyline I didn't enjoy, with the possible exception that when you're just watching these one after another, Castiel's storyline doesn't always make sense. It probably worked when there was a week to imagine he was recovering, rebuilding, or the such like. I mean, Angel powers weren't perfectly defined, and the show could have helped us out a little on that, but generally I was so happy I overcame my initial mistrust of this show and got into it. Well done, guys. I can't find the post from a friend of mine who thought this season of Doctor Who was especially strong, but in watching Peter Capaldi's Doctor defend artificially intelligent emoji robots as a new sentient species as being perfectly justified perhaps in destroying unhappy people living in buildings made of killer nanobots, which honestly, it feels like the architects would be called in for a review on that. A haunted house that serves to host semi-cloaked people eating bugs. Oh, and the Doctor's not allowed to travel anywhere in space and time anymore because he swore he would prison guard Missy in the basement. But he travels just as much as ever he likes, so long as he can distract his chaperone Nardole, who seems to just give up his pretense of holding to his sworn oath sometime after being destroyed by no longer existing in some parallel timeline projection, I guess. with Victorians on Mars somehow, with Victorians and Ice Warriors being able to communicate despite the TARDIS not being on Mars to provide the psychic link necessary to do so. Now I guess just the Doctor has to be there, which actually wrecks the aha reveal in Trial of a Time Lord's encounter where a faux vervoid, where Colin Baker's Doctor understand them without their communicator. No. But maybe just Bill needs to be there. Pearl Mackie is Bill, this pert young thing who has captured the Doctor's interest because she attends his class at university and actually pays attention despite not being a student, who has a passing thought of running away, so a puddle alien grabs her and transports her across the galaxy. I know this show is, at its core, a children's show, that it is written for kids, so storylines where if you have a month of sleep removed, the accumulated sleep in your eye becomes a rampaging monster, or that companies would totally staff a mining crew on some planet somewhere and then make them buy their oxygen at competitive rates. But I would argue that this has not been a strong season. So far, this season hasn't been building to anything or going anywhere, as far as I can tell. The Doctor tries to save the world from truth aliens, but now blinded, can't see the numbers on a screen, so he can't open a lock before a world-killing contagion is vented from a lab into the atmosphere as a safety measure. Seriously, are you people not even subjecting these storylines to a laugh test anymore? When he's got his phone and he could screenshot the image to anyone with eyes and they could just tell him the numbers to enter. I mean, some of this towering drama ends up being quite silly. I may be being unfair, but this has not been the pocket universe of the Pandorica, or the Impossible Girls splintered timeline, or River Song's tragic comic back-to-front romance with now 3 Doctors. I mean, it hasn't been the Key to Time or the Trial of a Time Lord storyline I mentioned, or with any hint of ever conjuring up the Valeyard from that storyline, by the way, who should basically have been an entire season by now. The seeds for the concentrated darkness within the Doctor coalescing as an adversary sometime at the end of the Doctor's 12th and final regeneration were potentially sown with the Dream Lord a few seasons ago, but that appears to have died a death. It hasn't had any of the grand arcing structure of Bad Wolf or Romana de Viractalunda or Torchwood. I mean, it's just the Doctor and Bill and Nardole showing up and reading lines around some crazy idea a writer had that somehow stretched into 42 minutes of not much lately. Lest anyone think I've given up entirely, I have enjoyed the character development on Missy somewhat, although she would appear to have gone good a little too directly. The Doctor was ferrying the Master to prison when we met Paul McGann. He became sort of a snake energy and escaped and then took up refuge at the very end of the universe as Professor Yana, then crafted the TARDIS into a paradox machine, became serial killer Prime Minister Harold Saxon, was killed and burned, and then was brought back and turned nearly every human on the planet into, well, himself. And who knows how we all switched back, since we were all genetically rewritten by a machine that does that, after all. I mean, he then reappeared as portrayed by Michelle Gomez as Missy, who has played the character as a complete psycho loon, moderating her step by step until she can almost be allowed back into polite society, and the Doctor seems to agree. Season 10 is stumbling to a close, and my hope is that they can redeem some of it with their treatment of this character. Supernatural and Doctor Who were 2 of the more significant shows I've cleared from my DVR most recently. Now you know how I've spent my spring, more or less. Here's a bit of what I've found in my classic cataloging, beginning with my Friday Night Feature. Friday Night Feature. As I'm clicking through my discs over any given week and listing what I'm finding on them, I will occasionally want to pause and rewatch a classic find or something that stands out. My blog, my rules, I'll decide the pace of this process. Friday night, or as it happened this weekend, Saturday afternoon, feels like a good opportunity to kick back on the futon and watch that something more in depth, and this week I chose TNT's production of The Company, specifically episode 2, hours 3 and 4. What grabbed my attention in the first place was the Alice in Wonderland reference in the monochromatic animated opening sequence. As a missile is fired in the distance, two bunnies in the foreground react and scamper into what looks like a rectangular hole in the earth, in the upper left-hand corner of which is a rabbit hole. As they pop down the rabbit hole, a woman's voice intones, "They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that there's anyone left alive." In Hour 3 of this episode, set in 1956, former sports figure Jack McAuliffe, played by Chris O'Donnell, is dispatched to Budapest to rendezvous with revolutionaries. He connects with Elizabeth, wife of poet-revolutionary Arpad. Jack informs him that the U.S. needs him to delay the uprising against the Hungarian secret police for a year to 18 months. Arpad refuses and continues to stoke the flames of revolution. Jack is then captured by the secret police, who show him Elizabeth being tortured, and he tells them the U.S. is fully behind the revolution and will offer the revolutionaries any support they require. The revolution gets underway shortly thereafter and seems to be doing pretty well until the Soviets intervene in support of the regime. The U.S. does not commit troops, the tide turns, and the revolutionaries are subdued. Arpad is killed, Jack receives intelligence concerning a mole in the CIA, codenamed Sasha. Elizabeth, a British national, is reunited with her young daughter, and Jack takes them back with him to the U.S. Hour 4 resumes the story in Cuba, where U.S. operatives are hot to depose Fidel Castro, but the U.S. refuses to commit military resources to making that happen. The CIA connects with mob contacts in Havana to cut an end run around this obstacle. There is some late intrigue involving poisoning Fidel's milkshake, and it should tell you the tone of a story when an assassination subplot is the comic relief. Against the backdrop of the Bay of Pigs invasion, Jack is involved in that operation, but even as Cuban revolutionaries prepare to face Castro's troops, the U.S. maintains its refusal to air cover or any support. The defeat is painful to watch, and the CIA's missteps are made public. Jack escapes with his life and returns to his wife and now children. Having plunked down and watched it, I guess I'm reacting to the context in which it aired in 2007, where U.S. intelligence was defending itself against allegations of enhanced interrogation techniques and military improprieties in Abu Ghraib. My reaction to the company is it sought to humanize the CIA, show them as patriotic go-getters whose reach sometimes exceeded their grasp, but their hearts were in the right place. I don't think a 6-hour miniseries was going to undo all of the negative press, but I can sure sympathize with the motivation, and it spun a good yarn as yarns go.
Diving into the classic collection.
In other highlights, one of the relatively obscure shows I encountered during this process that I remember enjoying when it aired was an episode of The Nine, which focused on a group of people whose lives all kind of became tied together when they were held hostage during a bank robbery. The show ran 13 episodes in 2006 and 2007 and featured John Billingsley from Star Trek Enterprise, which was probably my favorite part of the show. It was a twisty psychological exploration of how all these strangers became so important to each other, and I liked it. Other shows that stood out to me while cataloging them were a couple of episodes I recorded of My Name is Earl. The ones I encountered here aired in Season 1 around 2005-2006, where Earl tried to make up for stealing a hot dog cart and for stealing a police badge. I liked how quickly the writing in this show shifted from Earl simply tracking down past wrongdoings into the effects his actions had on those people. By the end of the series, Earl was straying so far from the premise the show seemed to be foundering, but nearer the beginning, the writers had some great ideas and had established a fantastic world in which to explore them. It's easy to see the roots of Raising Hope in these first season episodes. More disappointing was an episode of Close to Home featuring Jennifer Finnegan as Annabeth Chase, where a bride was murdered the night before her wedding and, oh heavens, was not a virgin. When it looked like the accused killer might go free, the enraged groom fired on him in a courtroom. How dramatic! The line that caught my attention was when Chase informed the groom that the jury foreman told her the defendant was going to be found guilty anyway. I didn't go back to see the exchange, but however they did it, that's just not a thing that would happen. Bruckheimer Schmaltz made it pitch-perfect lawyer fare for Midwestern viewers of a certain age, and I was giving it more of a chance than I should have because it featured Christian Kane from the Angel series. But as it happens, it's just space on a disc that could have been put to better use.
Current collection.
Turning to my current direct-to-DVD recordings, I see where I'd been holding on to some history so as to keep a copy for myself. I'd kept Hillary Clinton's address to the Democratic National Convention as carried on C-SPAN since July of 2016. I also had President Obama's farewell address as carried on CBS, and President Trump's inauguration ceremony as it was carried on ABC. I also had a good portion of something called People of the Upper Missouri, the Mandans, which, according to my timestamp, is missing about 10 minutes at the beginning, but is otherwise a nicely informative documentary produced by the State Historical Society of North Dakota. I also appear to have the entire first season of Good Behavior as it aired on TNT. That was one wild ride of a show. Con artist and ex-convict Letty, played by Michelle Dockery, refuses to put up with working conditions at the diner we find her in. Just as well she was fired then, but her boss essentially sided with her rapist, so that was horrifying. She gets dressed up and, assisted by a rogue bartender at a hotel, gains access to 4 rooms and boosts them shamelessly. In the last one, however, she gets pinned down in a closet and overhears a hit planned on a suburban housewife to be carried out by Javier, played by Juan Diego Botto. She thwarts his plan and steals his money and thinks she's gotten away with it until she is abducted by him and forced to aid him in carrying out his dastardly deeds. Navigating old classmates, ducking her parole officer, and negotiating exorbitant deals with her mother, whose fiancé is young enough to be her son, so as to allow Letty to maintain contact with her son over and above the restraining order against her. And wow, this show is so tightly written, I cannot wait for it to return. In the meantime, I've got the whole thing on disc, so score! Crowdsourcing! And thank you to everyone who helped me out with that. Occasionally I will encounter a show, a scene, or a scrap of video I recorded that doesn't seem to have much in the way of provenance or pedigree. This will happen most often when I left the machine running through to the end of the tape, usually overnight, and didn't specifically record over it. In what I'm calling the curious case of disc 232, I let the tape run out recording something on the Sundance Channel, which at some point switched over to this odd film parody sequence. The 2 I recognize are Pulp Fiction or maybe Reservoir Dogs, something decidedly Tarantinian, and Amile. Everyone's holding guns to everyone else. And I've included screenshots of Video Fuzzy's Facebook page. Lines from the scene include, "How long is this supposed to take? My gun arm is getting tired." And, "I want to be in the main cast." And, "They should have to take bit parts and move up the chain just like the rest of us." There's a weird interlude where Emily shows up, makes out with a tape recorder that she has fallen in love with, and then pops a single bubble of bubble wrap, initiating the rapid-fire sequence in which everyone shoots everyone else. That was the point at which the tape ran out. It's all I've got. Now, I could probably contact somebody at the Sundance Channel and find out directly, but where's the fun in that? I'm guessing anybody listening to this will probably have some interest in obscure media, and might actually know how to pronounce Emily, and might be able to point me in the right direction. If anyone's able to, I am at tjamon1970@yahoo.com, or you can contact me through my Video Fuzzy page on Facebook. Thanks in advance for your help and for tuning into this podcast. For Video Fuzzy, I'm Terry J. Amon. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.